There's a growing question on Main Street that's getting louder every time President Trump talks about tariffs. If the U.S. is collecting billions of dollars in tariff revenue from other countries, when will the American people actually see some of that money? Could it be in the form of a rebate check? Could it be another round of tax cuts? Or maybe a completely new kind of relief? Stay with me through this video because by the end, you'll know exactly what's on the table, what's realistic, and what you should and shouldn't expect in the months ahead. This is for anyone who's watching their budget closely, from working families to retirees, small business owners, and especially anyone curious about how trade policy could translate into personal financial relief. If you've heard rumors about tariff rebate checks or no income tax under $200,000, you need the facts before you start planning your budget around them. Here's the specific value you'll get for sticking with me to the end. You'll learn the actual proposals President Trump and certain lawmakers have floated, the political and economic hurdles they face, and the possible timelines. I'll break down which ideas could happen quickly, which are unlikely in the near term, and how all of it ties into broader debates over the federal debt, the economy, and election year politics. First, let's set the stage. President Trump has made tariffs a central part of his economic policy. And unlike past administrations, he's talking about applying them far more broadly. This could include tariffs on countries that trade with Russia, tariffs on gold, and tariffs on countries with what he calls reciprocal tariffs on U.S. goods. In other words, it's not just targeting a few trading partners, it's potentially aimed at many of them. The thinking here is that by taxing imports, the U.S. can generate significant revenue while also pushing for fairer trade terms. The big question is, what happens to that money? Some supporters are pushing the idea that tariff revenue should directly benefit American taxpayers, either through lower taxes, special credits, or rebate checks. During public appearances, Trump has even floated the concept, not a formal policy, but an idea, that if tariff revenues remain high enough, income taxes could be eliminated for people earning under $100,000 or $200,000 a year. That's a bold vision, and if it happened, it would be unprecedented in modern U.S. history. But here's the reality check. There's no legislation in place to make that happen yet. And Congress, both Republicans and Democrats, would have to sign off on such a massive change. So let's be clear. Proposals like eliminating the income tax for most Americans are aspirational ideas, not guarantees. Even some allies of the administration have publicly said they don't believe something that sweeping could happen quickly. The main reason? The federal debt. Lawmakers from both parties have emphasized that reducing the national debt is a priority, and completely removing income tax for tens of millions of people would blow a huge hole in annual federal revenue unless tariffs could fully replace it. And that's a massive if. Still, some steps have already been taken that show how tariff revenue could be paired with targeted relief. Trump has supported extending the previous tax cuts, expanding deductions for seniors, and increasing the child tax credit. These moves are smaller than eliminating income tax entirely, but they do provide relief for specific groups. The catch is that much of this relief comes through the tax system, which means you wouldn't see the money until you file your taxes next year. That's one reason people are eager for more immediate options. So what's actually being discussed behind the scenes? There are reports of talks, mostly among Republican lawmakers, about incentives tied to work and productivity. For example, ideas have been floated about reducing tax rates for people who work full-time hours, giving extra credits for those who log more than a certain number of hours a year, or offering special deductions for meeting milestones like buying a home, starting a business, or supporting children. The logic is that these measures would encourage workforce participation, boost the economy, and in turn, generate more tariff revenue to help pay for them. Some of these ideas also connect to other targeted tax breaks already in motion, like not taxing tips or overtime pay. If you think about it, that's a kind of micro relief, smaller targeted cuts that help certain workers more immediately than waiting for a tax filing season. Expanding that concept could mean more people get a direct benefit without a full overhaul of the tax system. From an economic perspective, the cause and effect theory here is straightforward. Tariffs raise revenue. More people working means more economic activity, and that combination could fund targeted relief without exploding the deficit. But the politics are not that simple. Passing new nationwide relief measures requires bipartisan support in Congress. And in an election cycle, both parties weigh political risks carefully. Looking toward the future, the most likely scenario in the near term is not a one-time tariff rebate check for everyone, but rather a mix of targeted tax cuts, credits, and deductions that reach different groups over time. Something like Senator Josh Hawley's proposal, which has been mentioned in connection to tariff revenue, would still have to make it through Congress. And that's no small task. As of now, it's just that, a proposal. Whether it passes depends on political bargaining, economic forecasts, and how much influence its backers have with their colleagues across the aisle. Here's what history tells us. We have seen federal relief in the form of checks before, from the 2008 stimulus under President Obama to the pandemic-era payments under both Trump and Biden. But those were driven by crises, not tariff surpluses. Using tariff revenue for direct checks would be something new, and while it's possible, there's no precedent to suggest it's likely without a major economic event to trigger bipartisan urgency. If you're wondering about timing, here's the honest answer. As of right now, there's no official date or plan for a tariff-funded check to Americans. There are policy conversations happening, and there's a chance for targeted relief measures to pass in the coming year, especially before an election. But the sweeping no income tax under $200,000 vision is not imminent. One more angle worth considering is how tariff revenue interacts with inflation. Critics often point out that tariffs can raise prices on imported goods, which may offset the benefits of any tax cuts or rebates. For example, if a tariff makes electronics, cars, or groceries more expensive, households could end up paying more at the store, even if they get a small break on taxes. Supporters counter this by arguing that tariffs incentivize domestic production, which can eventually bring prices down and create more American jobs. The truth probably lies somewhere in the middle. In the short term, prices on certain goods might rise, but over the long term, a shift toward local production could stabilize or even reduce costs for consumers. Another factor is how global trade partners react. If major economies impose retaliatory tariffs, U.S. exporters could face tougher markets abroad, potentially impacting industries like agriculture, manufacturing, and technology. That's why any plan to use tariff revenue for domestic relief has to be balanced against the risk of trade disputes escalating. In other words, even a promising idea on paper can run into real-world friction, and understanding those trade-offs is key before betting on any one outcome. So what are the key takeaways? First, tariff revenue is real and growing, but the leap from that to direct personal relief is still in the proposal stage. Second, the most likely relief in the short term will be through targeted tax measures, not across-the-board checks. Third, the national debt remains a major obstacle to large-scale permanent tax cuts without offsetting revenue sources. If you want to be ready for whatever passes, there are two things you can do now. Stay informed so you can adjust your tax planning early and keep track of any state or local relief programs. Sometimes, state governments move faster than the federal level, and if your city or state has a surplus, you could see rebates or tax cuts there even before anything happens nationally. At the end of the day, the push for tariff-funded relief comes down to a balance between political will, economic math, and public demand. The conversation is happening, the proposals are out there, and the pressure will likely build as we head into 2026. For now, don't bank on a check arriving in your mailbox from tariff revenue. But do watch for more targeted relief measures that could still put money back in your pocket.